One of the most powerful features of any programming language is going to be the ability to define and use functions. And that's certainly going to be true of PHP. And in this movie, we're going to take a look at how we can define functions that will be bits of code that we can reuse quickly and easily throughout our PHP pages and eventually our web applications. Now, let's take a look at this typical structure of a function. When we want to declare a function, that is, define it, we would say function to tell PHP that we're defining a function, followed by the name of the function, then any of the arguments that belong to the function, and we'll talk more about arguments in a moment. Those go in parentheses, followed by open curly braces. Any statements that we want to make, the code that we want to reuse, would go inside those curly braces, followed by an ending curly brace. And that's going to let it know that this is a function. This is a bit of code that you should hang on to because we're going to be reusing it later. Now, one quick note I want to make is that you'll see I have name, space, open parentheses. It's very common, in fact, probably more common, that you'll actually see it without the space. So it'll be name and then the parentheses. But both of them will work fine. I think probably if you did a survey of PHP developers, most of them are going to use name, and immediately following the name of the function, they'll go ahead and put their arguments. Now, the first slide said that we were talking about user-defined functions, and that's because these are functions that we define ourselves. Well, that implies that there are also functions that were not defined by the user, and in fact, PHP has many of those already, and we've seen some of those. In the chapter on types, when we were looking at strings, we took a look at the string replace function, and we replaced the word quick with the word super fast inside our string, which was the quick brown fox, etc., etc. So this is a function, and this is not a function being defined, this is a function being called. So this is what it looks like when we're calling a function and we want to execute a bit of code using some arguments. And quick, super fast, and third string are the three arguments that string replace uses. So the definition of string replace might look something like this. It would be defined with the function command, then the name, followed by the three arguments. What we're searching for, what we want to replace it with, and then the subject that we're going to be searching inside of and replacing inside of. And then inside that would be all of the statements that would tell it how to go about that and how to execute that. Now, because it's defined by PHP, we don't have to worry about what all those statements are. It'll do it for us. But when we're going to be defining our own functions, of course, that's going to be the part that we're most interested in. Now, the name of a function can be just about anything you want. It's similar to the way that we named strings earlier. It can contain letters, numbers, underscores, and dashes. It can't contain any spaces, of course, or it would think that it was a new name or something else. And it must start with either a letter or an underscore. Unlike string names, function names are going to be case insensitive, which means that we could define a function with capital letters in it and actually call it with all lowercase letters, and it would still find the function and know which one we meant. But that's a bad programming practice and bad habit, and we don't want to get into it. So if we define it with all lowercase, we want to call it in all lowercase. If we define it with a capital letter in the middle, we want to call it with a capital letter in the middle. So go ahead and get used to that habit of always defining your functions with a certain name and calling them with the same name. So let's go ahead and get started defining our first simple function, and we'll get a better feel for how these work. I'm going to open up my PHP sandbox, and I'm going to go ahead and open up basic.html, simple HTML file that I created earlier. I'm just going to do save as on that, and I'm going to create a new file here, and we're going to call it functions.php. I'll put it in my PHP sandbox and save it, and now this will give me a place where I can work with it. I'll go ahead and change the title to be functions, and let's go ahead and make our open PHP body tags, and now we're ready to declare our first function. So we saw how we define functions, and we do that using function, followed by the name we want to give our function. So let's make this one say hello. That's easy enough. And then we're going to need our parentheses that's going to contain our arguments. Now, it doesn't have to contain arguments. We can actually have a function that can be called with no arguments at all. And that's actually what we're going to do for this first one. So I'm going to just move on and put my curly braces, and then I'm going to put my statements inside, the code that it should execute. So let's say echo hello world, right? That's easy enough. And I'll go ahead and put a BR tag in there. So we've now defined a function called say hello, and when called, that's what the function will do. It will echo back hello world. So I'm going to save that. So let's go back over to our browser, open up Firefox, and I'm going to navigate to http:// localhost if you're on PC. If you're on a Mac, you're going to want to also go into your user directory, PHP sandbox, and functions.php, and that's where I've stored my file. Now, it did load the page. We know that because the title changed to functions up here at the top. Let's go ahead and view our source, and you'll see that nothing appeared between the body tags. That's because we defined the function, but we didn't call the function. So nothing happens, nothing is output. That echo does not occur when we define the function, only when we call it. So let's call the function. Calling it works just like we did when we were doing string functions and we said string replace, and that had a result. The result was that it replaced the string. So all we have to do is simply say hello. We'll put our parentheses so that we can remind ourselves that it's a function with no arguments, and then the semicolon at the end. That's now a valid statement. Because we've defined it as a function, it is now valid PHP. So let's save our document, let's switch back over, and let's reload, and we'll see that now it executes that function, hello world. We've called this bit of code. We've called the function. Now, we can define more than one function. Let's go ahead and just copy our say hello code here, and I'm just going to skip down a bit, and I'm going to have a second one. And we'll go ahead and just make this say hello 2, because function names can have numbers in them. That's no problem. And this one is going to have an argument. And let's say that the argument for this is going to be word. We're going to send it a word. And instead of hello world, let's go ahead and use that structure we learned about where we put in the variable into the double quoted string. So I've got my curly braces inside there, followed by my variable word. So now you can probably guess what this is going to do. So now we're going to call our new function by using say hello 2, because that's the name of our new function. And this time, instead of just calling the function with nothing in the parentheses, we're going to need to pass it an argument. So we're going to simply put in world. There we go. So now I'm going to save it, and we've now got 2 functions defined, say hello and say hello 2. Say hello is being called, and say hello 2 is being called. So we should get 2 lines of output. We'll save it, come back to our browser, and reload, and sure enough, we get 2 things back. Now, the reason we want to use arguments is that we now have given our function some flexibility, and flexibility is going to be a really good, really powerful thing for us, because we can have code that we can reuse for different circumstances. So instead of just hello world, I can actually copy that line, and let's call it a second time, and this time we're going to say hello everyone. I'll save it, we'll come back over here and we'll reload it. And now it's executing that same bit of code, but with a different argument. So the first one is not flexible. I have only one way to run it. When I call say hello, it returns hello world every single time. The second one has flexibility built into it because I can pass it an argument, and based on that argument, it can do different things in the code. It's dynamic code. And since dynamism is what we're working towards with PHP, that's a good thing. Now, there are a couple of things I want you to note about defining functions before we move on to more advanced concepts. And that is, first of all, that a function has to be defined, obviously, or we can't call it. If we were, for example, to start another one that said, say hello 3, and we went ahead and gave it an argument and everything so that it looks the same, obviously we haven't defined it, and it's going to give us an error. We can go ahead and save that and try it, and we'll see it says called to undefined function. Now, functions don't necessarily have to be defined before we use them. And that's an important point. In PHP 3, that was true. The code for defining a function had to precede calling it. But in PHP 4 and PHP 5, that's no longer true. There is a pre-processing that goes on where it actually finds all of the functions first so that they're all available to you, and then you can call them anywhere. Now, it's still good programming practice to go ahead and have them at the top, because if someone else is coming back and reading your code later, they may be starting from the top of your PHP and working their way down, trying to figure out what your code is doing. And if you call a function they haven't seen yet, it might make it harder to read. But you could put comments in saying, hey, this is where the function is located, or something like that if you wanted to. But a better, easier programming practice is always to just define them at the top. The second thing you want to be careful of is that you can't define a function more than once. Once it's defined, it's like a constant. It's fixed. So let's go ahead and try that. Let's copy say hello 2 here, and I'm going to go ahead and replace this say hello 3 with it. And let's redefine it, and this time let's just change what it does to error, or let's make it this won't work. So now we've defined hello2, we're using it, and then we're redefining it again. And we can't define it the second time. Let's save it and come back over here. Cannot redeclare say hello to, previously declared. So just keep that in mind because that's going to come up as we start creating larger websites with lots of functions that we're calling. We're going to want to take some care in making sure that we don't repeat ourselves by declaring a function more than once. Once it's loaded in, we can use it. We don't have to declare it a second time. The last point that I want to make is that right now I'm declaring these functions at basically the root of my PHP. I'm declaring them not inside something like a loop or an if-then statement or inside another function. I'm declaring them on their own. You can declare functions inside if-then statements. You can declare functions inside other functions. And as you get more advanced, that might become useful to you. But as a beginner, you don't want to do it. You want to really make sure you have them all by themselves, define the function on its own, and put any if-then statements or anything like that inside the function. And that's going to keep you from getting yourself tripped up. So I'm going to go ahead and just delete this last function here that doesn't work because we don't want to have a page that doesn't work saved. And I'm going to save it one last time. And then we'll go on to the next movie and we'll look at a little bit more of what functions can do for you and some of the particulars of how to work with them.